May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Merry Christmas to you all. So very glad to see you all. This is a challenging sermon to preach tonight. Not only because of the physical and spiritual beauty and joy of this great festival of Christmas, which transcends all human language, but also I feel challenged after learning early this morning of the death of our beloved Rabbi in residence, Rabbi Leonard Biermann. Tonight is a time of deep gratitude for his life and sadness at his dying. With so much stirring in our hearts tonight, it is important that all of us have brought all our feelings together here in this place, in this liturgy. Rabbi Biermann mentioned frequently the importance of the warmth we receive from coming together. The Hebrew word synagogue literally means to bring together. And I believe that love, God's love, is the one thing big enough to contain all of our hopes and fears, our grief and our joy, our disappointments and failures, as well as our deep gratitude. So for a few moments, let's settle in together to let the divine love in the universe envelop all that we have brought to this liturgy this night. I want to tell you about the first meeting I ever had with Rabbi Biermann. It was almost 20 years ago now. I had inherited him as All Saints Rabbi in residence. His dear friend, my predecessor, George Regas, had named Leonard to that post. And I just moved to town to become rector. Leonard and I met, just him and me, for lunch at a tennis club halfway between Pasadena and Bel Air, where Leo Beck Temple is located. Leonard was the founding rabbi of Leo Beck. At lunch, I asked Leonard if he would continue to be our rabbi in residence here. He said that if I was sure I wanted him, that he would be honored. Then, with the formal agenda item accomplished, I heard my inner voice announce what my deepest agenda item was. Without thinking it through, I said to Leonard, I am scared. I have just stepped into the impossible job of following George Regas as rector. Will you please give me your best advice? Leonard was quiet for a while, perhaps conversing with his own inner voice. And he looked at me with his gentle smile and said, Ed, my best advice is to remind you of the story of when Moses died and God determined that Joshua would be Moses' successor to lead the Israelites to cross the Jordan River. Joshua too was scared, and God said to him, and then Leonard quoted in Hebrew, Joshua chapter 1, and then said to me in his gentle, mellifluous voice, Ed, this means, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous. The scripture repeats that 2 more times. Be strong and very courageous, Leonard said. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Rabbi Biermann, along with his close friend George Regas, our rector emeritus, and Dr. Maher Hatut, were the interfaith deans of embodying the life of justice and peace that transcends any religion. Desmond Tutu has written a book called God is Not a Christian. He's right. God is not a Christian. God is not a Jew. God is not a Muslim. God is all and more than those distinctions. God is justice and peace and inclusion and reconciliation for all. One email I received this morning called Leonard the poet laureate of our religious lives. There is indeed poetry in Leonard's dying on the morning of what for us at All Saints Church is the most interfaith service of the year. I'm moved deeply that one of Leonard's daughters, Elizabeth Biermann Rothbart, texted me this morning that she and her family were still coming to church here tonight. She said she wanted to be surrounded by love and prayer. And Elizabeth and her family are here with us in this service. Welcome, my friend. We are also honored, and I'm surprised that my brother Ken Chasen, the senior rabbi of Leo Beck Temple, is here with his wife Allison. I expected him to be with his mother on her birthday tonight, but he's here. And we're also honored by the presence of Rabbi Joshua Levine Grader, his wife Francie, and their twins Noah and Ella, who just celebrated their bar and bat mitzvah this past Saturday. Rabbi Levine Grader was supposed to substitute for Rabbi Heather Miller, who's sick, but they did a switcheroo on me, and Rabbi Chasen surprised me by even being here and reading Isaiah 9. And Rabbi R.A. Cohen and his wife Andrea Hodos are here. In celebration of our interfaith life and what I think is interreligious reality, we have tonight added a passage from the Holy Qur'an for the first time in the history of All Saints Church. And our longtime friend and international leader of peace, Dr. Nazir Khaja, honored us with that reading. And Jaheen and Maher Zia Ben Musa, friends of Dr. Maher Hatut, also are here. The distinguished leader of the progressive Muslim movement, Ani Zanafeld, is here. My friend Ken Fujimoto, a wonderful Zen Buddhist, is here. We are honored by your interfaith presence, my friends. Let us welcome them. We've been brought together tonight by one of the simplest and at the same time grandest of stories in the history of stories. This oh-so-sacred story makes an outlandish claim that the best way to understand who God is to gaze at a baby. The peace of God, the justice of God, and the majesty of God are not established in history through a warrior king. God is not coercive or punitive or dominating. Rather, divine peace, divine justice, and divine majesty are made manifest in history through the disarming power of gentleness and tenderness. The gentleness and tenderness we see most powerfully in a baby. Nothing has the power to disarm and to break through a calloused and cold heart like a baby. True maturity and true humanity find their ultimate expression in gentleness. The most powerful instrument for healing the world of its oppression and injustice and violence, is tenderness. The power of this childlike tenderness and gentleness happens to be a point of agreement of all the world's religions. The Hebrew passage appointed for tonight bespeaks of peace and justice and righteousness being established by a child. For the first time in our history at All Saints, as I said, we added that scriptural passage from the Holy Qur'an, which speaks of the truth of wisdom, of the Torah, and of the gospel coming from the cradle. I wanted all of you to know that the Qur'an talks so highly of Jesus and Mary and of the Torah and of the gospel. And the Christian version of the sacred story read tonight describes that a baby swaddled and lying in a humble feeding trough of animals was the occasion for the angels to sing peace on earth, goodwill to all. My friends, peace and justice for all cannot come through coercion, domination, punishment, polarization, and power over others. Our world's divisions, oppression, occupations, racism, or any form of bigotry, prejudice, and exclusion will never end through retaliation and escalation. One group dominating another. All the great leaders of history, notably Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela, had fierce spirits, but gentle, all-inclusive agendas and gentle souls of kindness, peace and justice and healing will only come through the gentleness and tenderness we see in babies. Father Gregory Boyle visited us at All Saints in early December. This giant of gang intervention in Los Angeles. He said, tenderness is the strongest thing there is. He said, the thing I'm reflecting on a lot these days is the tenderness of God. If love is the answer, community is the context, then tenderness is the methodology, the delivery system. Tenderness is the most reflective of the kind of God we have. God is too busy loving us to get around to being disappointed in us. Greg Boyle, who has buried more than 200 former gang members, says, I try not to do disappointment because I know that God doesn't. Well, then you can say, well, surely God is disappointed in us for not solving hunger. Surely God is dismayed at us for having so many guns and folks willing to use them. But then he said, I don't believe that's true. God is too busy loving to be disappointed. And the truth of that love and that tenderness is that God is not wagging God's finger at us. The truth of that love is helping us put our finger on the problems and their solutions. And if the world knew and felt the tenderness of God, then wouldn't we naturally solve hunger, disarm ourselves, and include people? I think that's the way the world works. Greg Boyle said, otherwise, we have a God who's shaking his head and rolling his eyes. What we really have is a God who loves us and who invites us to be tender with each other. So that's the story tonight, my friends. I've just told you the story. And all of us who have at strategic points in our lives received tenderness from a parent or a friend or a pastor or a rabbi or an imam or a therapist or a lover, know how healing and redemptive tenderness is. It is divine tenderness as seen in a baby that includes the excluded, melts the hard-hearted, lifts up the lowly, bridges the widest chasms, and heals the oldest of traumas. We will not solve the old problem of racism that infects all our American life until we learn to be tender with one another and let that tenderness disarm us. Think of tenderness being God. Tenderness is in the world. Tenderness is what created the world. Tenderness is the essence of each one of us. lying inside our hearts, just waiting for us to give it life and flesh and expression in our daily choices. Tenderness with one another is our true self. Tender, loving care that heals and that overcomes sin and death is our story. It is our narrative. It is one way to say what Christmas is all about: the healing power and light of tenderness. Overcoming the darkness is another way to tell the Christmas story. Now, I'm going to wind this up, but not before this point. The Christmas story always has two parts. One part is the story itself, and I've argued in this sermon so far that this is the story to which we are called tenderness. This is the story that will heal, tenderness. This is the story that will dismantle all that kills us, tenderness. Now, the other part of the story is whether or not you and I will take up our role in the story. Last Saturday, when I attended the bar and bat mitzvah of Ella and Noah, sitting here in the fourth row, just turned 13. There was a moment when their rabbi father turned the service over to another rabbi so that this father could be father at that moment instead of rabbi. And the rabbi to whom he turned the service over was Yael Rydberg. She went up to the bima, which is, I think, what we call this. Right? And then the ark where the scrolls of the Torah are kept was opened, and Rabbi Rydberg said to Ella and Noah, "This entire service has been leading to this point where Ella and Noah find their place in the Torah and take their place in the Torah in the story." At that point, a lump came into my throat. I'd already been working on a sermon entitled, what's the name of the sermon? Your Very Human Role in the Very Sacred Story. I'd been working on that sermon. And she said, "This is where you take your part and take your role in the Torah." I said, "That's it. That's our true life. Finding our place and taking our place in the story that can heal the world and that can bring justice and that can bring peace and that can dismantle racism and can put an end to war and oppression." When Rabbi Rydberg returned to her seat right in front of where I was sitting, I told her how moved I was by what she had just said. And she told me that when the Torah scrolls are placed back in the ark later in the service, that sometimes worshipers will lift the tallets or the fringes of their prayer shawls or point with their little finger toward the Torah. And she said that one interpretation of that is that the worshipers are pointing to the place in the story that they have found that has their name on it. My friends, this is what Christmas called you and me to do. What part of this story that says to be godlike, one must be tender and gentle and open to wonder like a little child, what part of that story has your name on it tonight? Ella and Noah, Levine Grader, last Saturday became the daughter and son of the commandment, of the teaching, of the Torah, of the story that redeems all of humanity. That's what bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah mean. The question for you and me is, have you and I joined Ella and Noah to become a daughter or a son of the sacred story of Christmas? The Saturday before Ella and Noah's B'nai Mitzvah, my wife and I attended the Muslim Public Affairs Council dinner, in part because I'm a member of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, and also it's a part of my identity as a Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Jesuit, atheist, Baptist, Episcopal priest. And Rais Biermann was the speaker. Now, I've been stalking this young man since I wrote about him in the forgiveness chapter of my book, 8 Habits of Love. Rais has been shot in the face with a shotgun by a guy named Mark Stroman just days after 9/11. Stroman, in a drug-induced rage, decided that he was going to go out and kill some Arabs in Dallas. And so he went to 2 7-Elevens in his prejudice, thinking that that's where he could find some Arabs to kill. He killed 2 men, neither of whom were Arab, and shot Rais in the face. Rais is a Bangladeshi. And Rais, in his physical healing, heard that his Muslim faith speaking to him. He heard the Qur'an calling him in his interior spirit to the essence of his Torah, his story, that of mercy and forgiveness. And Rais became a son of the Qur'an. He forgave Stroman and worked against Stroman's being executed by the state of Texas. He failed. But before Stroman died, Stroman called Rais and thanked him for forgiving him and called him my bro. And Salam al-Mariyati at this banquet reminded us of Quran chapter 41, verse 34. There is a difference between good and evil, and you have the power to overcome evil with good, such that those with whom you have enmity can become your devoted friends. My wife wrote about the speech Rais made on her Facebook page. Tonight was truly inspirational. The council is dedicated to spreading the true identity of Islam and developing the relationships across all religions. We all have so much more in common than separates us: love of God, forgiveness, compassion. It's not about the stereotypes that we've all acquired. Rais told us that he reached forgiveness for his attacker when he refused to continue to blame. His attacker was the product of his environment, of an America that has failed, and when given more exposure and input, could see the other as a brother. High goals to try to reach. At Rabbi Leonard Biermann's last sermon 2 months ago on Yom Kippur, he revealed which part of the sacred story has his name on it. It was as if he was reminding us that he was a bar mitzvah, a son of the story. He said, I have only one idea: the irreplaceability and the worth of every soul, and the warmth we receive from coming together. I believe that the system did not make us. We made the system. And we have the responsibility that the system not oppress souls. We cannot fulfill ourselves in an inhuman world until we hold up the sacredness of every human being. Then he said, the world needs people who are troubled and touched by another's sorrow and joyful at the uplifting of others. Our world needs troubled people, men and women who care, who are not ashamed to be sensitive and tender, who can resist all those friends and enemies who seek to prevent us from seeing the utter uniqueness and irreplaceability of our own and others' souls. My friends, tonight I'm dreaming of a new world. And I'm dreaming that I have a role to play in making that new world happen. And you have a role to play in making that new world happen. And in fact, you and I are, with our communities, making the new world happen because we are daughters and sons of the story. your very human role in the very sacred story. Will you be a daughter of the tenderness story? Will you be a son of the tenderness story? What part of this story has your name on it? Be troubled by anything that in this life is not tender, and be among the resistors that makes a new world of tenderness for every feeling and perceiving being. Merry Christmas. Amen.